morning and I started my day. God's mercy was with me all of the way. His goodness stayed close by to meet all my needs. My Lord is taking good care of me. I'm never forsaken, I'm never alone. One day I'm a-moving to my brand new home. I'm blessed beyond measure, just look close, you'll see. My Lord is taking good care of me. I'm counting my blessings as I journey along. Good friends, a family, and a place to call home. The church where I worship, the Bible I read. My Lord is taking good care of me. When Satan comes tempting and he brings up my past, I tell him I'm forgiven and it's buried at last. The blood shed on Calvary now speaks for me. My Lord is taking good care of me. I'm never forsaken, I'm never alone. One day I'm a-moving to my brand new home. I'm blessed beyond measure, just look close, you'll see. My Lord is taking good care of me. I'm never forsaken, I'm never alone. One day I'm a-moving to my brand new home. I'm blessed beyond measure, just look close, you'll see. My Lord is taking good care of me. I'm blessed beyond measure, just look close, you'll see. My Lord is taking, He's always taking. My Lord is taking good care of me. What I was and I'm not what I'll be. You see, I've been born again. My life has been changed, completely rearranged since the day that Christ set me free. The old man I shed, I'm living, He's dead. I'm walking this heavenly way. I have no regrets, for nothing I've left. I'll stick with the old-fashioned way. I'm an old-fashioned, Bible-believing, born-again child of God. I'm a hell-fighting, devil-denier who's washed in the crimson flood. I'm singing and shouting, no longer doubting, just waiting on Jesus to come. I'm an old-fashioned, Bible-believing, born-again child of God. It's settled and decided, I'm not gonna hide it. I am not ashamed. The old King James Bible can still bring revival when the saints kneel down to pray. I believe Bible teaching and Holy Ghost preaching are the answer for this modern day. And old-timey worship, it's not gonna hurt us, we call it the old-fashioned way. I'm an old-fashioned, Bible-believing, born-again child of God. I'm a hell-fighting, devil-denier who's washed in the crimson flood. I'm singing and shouting, no longer doubting, just waiting on Jesus to come. I'm an old-fashioned, Bible-believing, born-again child of God. I'm an old-fashioned, Bible-believing, born-again child of God. I'm a hell-fighting, devil-denier who's washed in the the crimson flood. I'm singing and shouting, no longer doubting, just waiting on Jesus to come. I'm an old-fashioned, Bible-believing, born-again child of God. I'm an old-fashioned, Bible-believing, born-again child of God. I'm a born-again child of God. Here among the shadows in a lonely land, we're a band of pilgrims on the move, burdened down with sorrow, shunned on every hand. We're looking for a city built above, looking for a city where we'll never die. There the sainted millions never say goodbye. There we'll meet our Savior and our loved ones too. Come, O Holy Spirit, all our hopes renewed. Here in disappointment we so sadly roam, friends no longer speak one word of love. We have found contentment, Jesus promised us a home. We're looking for a city built above, looking for a city where we'll never die. There the sainted millions never say goodbye. There we'll meet our Savior and our loved ones too. Come, O Holy Spirit, all our hopes renewed. In this land of danger, we're going here and there, trusting in the blessed Savior's love. Though we may be strangers living in this world of care, we're looking for a city built above, looking for a city where we'll never die. There the sainted millions never say goodbye. There we'll meet our Savior and our loved ones too. Come, O Holy Spirit, all our hopes renewed. Looking for a city where we'll never die. There the sainted millions never say goodbye. There we'll meet our Savior and our loved ones too. Come, O Holy Spirit, all our hopes renewed. Looking for a city where we'll never die. There the sainted millions never say goodbye. There we'll meet our Savior and our loved ones too. Come, O Holy Spirit, all our hopes renewed.
Morning, everybody, and welcome to Sunday School. And we'll start off as we usually do with any prayer requests. How many prayer requests this morning?
Well, Brandon, I've got a special unspoken request. Somebody sent me, just asked that the church pray about. God knows all about it. And then also, my dad's girlfriend, Teresa, her mom is in the hospital this morning. They don't expect her to make it through the day. And so, just ask y'all to remember her. And then also, Teresa herself has had some issues with her heart this week. And they're having to change some medicine and do some things to try to help her. So, remember her, but like I said, they're not expecting her mom to make it through the day, so just ask that y'all would remember. Her name's Joe.
Joe. Okay. Let's continue to remember Brother Jerry and Karen, and also David and Teresa and all the other people who are not present due to illnesses or other reason. Keep them in our prayers. Anyone else?
Remember Mom and Dad, they'll travel home, start traveling home tomorrow from South Dakota. And then I've got a family member that needs lots of prayer right now.
Anyone else?
Continue to pray for Mark Gable. He went to the doctor Thursday. It was a good report, but they are telling him that they don't think that he will get full use of his movement in his wrist. And he's pretty upset about that. Of course, he uses his hands a lot, so chicken bars and things like that. So just remember him.
Okay. Anyone else? No other prayer requests. Brother Caleb, could you open us up in prayer, please?
Lord Jesus, we thank you so much for allowing us to gather once again in your house. I pray you please touch and help each and every request, family members, God, and all the ones that's had medical issues and things. God, we pray for all the people in our church, the hearts, God, this morning, that you please touch and help each and every need of each and every heart, God, in the Sunday school hour, preaching hour, and the singing hour as well. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
This morning, open your Bibles, please, to Ezekiel chapter 11. Ezekiel chapter 11, and we'll read verse 12. Ezekiel chapter 11, verse 12. And ye shall know that I am the Lord, for ye have not walked in my statutes, neither executed my judgments, but have done after the manners of the heathen that are round about you. The Israelites were warned not to adopt the customs of other nations. Following heathen practices caused trouble. Believers today are tempted to copy the ways of the world. We must get our standards of right and wrong from God's word and not from the popular wisdom of the world. And with that, you dismiss your classes.
Well, good morning, everyone. I know it's a great morning. The Big Orange conquered. Everybody's happy. The SEC. Do what? Rated? I don't have a clue. I don't know. You know, all this rated stuff. That is called man's judgment. It's all about man's judgment. The only team that can be rated is whether the coach gets fired or not. You know, that's when you get at that level and you're making around $250,000. You think about how much do they pay him and all that and all that occurs. And you know, I told somebody one time, University of Tennessee men's basketball program was open. And I said, I think I'll apply. And I'll tell them I'll take half the salary that the person just left. That's all I need. And I would last 1 year. But that 1 year would set me up for the rest of my life. So, you get into this analogy, and I love these people that come after the ball game and they solve every team's problem. They talk about, what's going to occur and everything. And this goes right along with our book today, and that's Amos. the book of Amos. So let's jump into that and leave football alone for a while. But anyway, I want to give you some things here in the book of Amos. It's a book, Amos and Hosea goes hand in hand. They go hand in hand. That's one of the things that we want to stress in Amos. Now, it's kind of like just what we talked about just a second ago. You know, you're going into a situation to be like me going into coaching the University of Tennessee. I'm not ready to go in and coach the University of Tennessee. I'm not ready for that. Number one, my age has caught up with me, and the discipline would be terrible because I would be more focused on the process and what we needed to get accomplished than I would be discipline. Right now, most teams, the biggest problem that they have is disciplining their players. But anyway, Amos, he was called to go in and deliver God's word. What was Amos? Amos was a shepherd and a gatherer of sycamore fruit. If you go into Amos, if you go to chapter 7, look here at chapter 7. Now we're talking about a man that God is using that's never been to prophecy school. He's not been, he is going just right along with what the Lord tells him to do. In chapter 7, starting in verse 14. Now this is the conflict that Amos has with Amaziah. And Amos is strong and he's bold. But he does a lot of you see a lot of tactfulness in his, if that's a word, tactfulness. Is that a word? Okay, good, thank you. I really appreciate that, Miss Eva. That was my senior English teacher. But anyway, as you look at this, he shows a lot of tact. And I'm going to show you the strategy that God put upon Amos in order for his preaching and his sermon. That's one of the main things we'll look at. But look at verse 14 with me, 7:14. Then answered Amos and said to Amaziah, I was no prophet, neither was I a prophet's son, but I was a herdsman and a gatherer of sycamore fruit. So right off the bat, you look at this, God can use anyone to do his work, to do his mission. You know, if someone would have said, well, even 15 years ago, Dallas, you're going to be teaching Sunday school. I would have said, hey, I don't know enough about the Bible to teach it. You got to know some things about the Bible. Well, it hit me when I walked away, when I said that, well, that means that I need to study the Bible. I need to study, no matter whether I'm going to teach or whether I'm not going to teach. But I need to know the Bible. If I'm going to come in here and sit in church, then I need to know what the Bible is actually saying. I need to have knowledge of that. So when I sit and talk with someone and they start saying, have you been baptized? If you've not been baptized, you're not saved and you're on your way to hell. So I need to understand that is not the doctrine that this Bible teaches. So there's a lot of things when we stand up and we think we're a coach, we think we can do the job, but really and truly, we've not done the groundwork in order to prepare ourselves to be the job. So the prophecy of Amos is characterized by great boldness. He was bold in what he was talking about and what he did. But he also showed great tact. He was very tactful in how he presented his message. And I think it's all laid out in God. It's God's plan. Now, why does God use people like Amos? It's to show you that God receives all the glory, should receive all the glory in the things that has been done throughout this book. He uses just these people because it's all about God. It's all about God. Everything that we do, even in the church and what we do, we should always remember it's all about God. So, Amos was delivered to deliver God's message of judgment against Israel, the northern kingdom. So we know that Amos, who was from the southern kingdom, was told to go to the northern kingdom and to deliver the message. And what message is he going to be delivering? Well, the whole book, primarily the whole book, is about the nations, the heathen nations, about the judgment that's coming. And, you know, and some of the prophecy has already been fulfilled with these things here. So I want to read to you, this is coming out of the book, let's see, yeah. This is coming from John Phillips's book. So I want to just kind of give you the wording of what he said about Amos and what the whole thing is, and I think it's pretty good. But all this was so God raised up the written prophets. God raised up the written prophets. And there's 12, they call them minor prophets. Minor prophets. It's just that they was real quick, or not real quick. What they were preaching was short but to the point. They didn't have a lot of writings in the book like Isaiah, Jeremiah. That's the only reason they're called the minor prophets. They focused on one theme, where Isaiah and Jeremiah, they focused on a bunch, quite a few different themes throughout, and Ezekiel goes in that category as well. So God's answer to the sword was the pen. God's answer to the sword was the pen. Long centuries after, all the battles that occurred, Assyria, that battles and the things that they did, long centuries after Assyria had passed away and its place erased from the map, so completely indeed that Alexander the Great could match his armies over the site of Nineveh. What prophet that we've already studied went to Nineveh? Jonah. What prophet, when you take Amos, this book, what prophet does Amos take words from quite a bit in this book that we've already studied? It's the book of Joel. So you go back and you look at the book of Joel, and you take the book of Amos. He's using what Joel did and what he talked about and how he did. So God's put that. I'm sure Amos knew about Joel. I'm sure he did. Because he used a lot of his writings, a lot of his things. In other words, what I'm trying to get to is it all comes together to one central figure. And it's God. It's God. So whenever you study the book, you will find out that it will always lead you back to God. And so as we look at this now, Nineveh not knowing that the ruins of a mighty empire lay beneath his feet. Long centuries later, the words of the Hebrew prophets still stand today. All the things, all these prophets, the martyrs and killed, and all the apostles killed based on their works, based on establishing the foundation of the church. They were all martyred because of what they were preaching and what they were doing. Jesus was on the scene. That's what the kingdom. Talking about going to the kingdom, that and so forth. So all that right there, leads us up into, we're in the Old Testament. We're in the Old Testament. But what does the New Testament rely on when it talks about history? The Old Testament. The Old Testament. So it all goes hand in hand. So all this was in the future when the first star of the 12 began to gleam in the darkening Hebrew sky. In fact, the Hebrews did not even know it was getting dark. The Hebrew people in those days were divided into what? 2 kingdoms. Now what we're talking about right here, you have 2 kingdoms. You have a kingdom, Israel. And they can't see out there what the whole purpose of the whole thing was. The covenant was fulfilled. You had 12 tribes. And each one had a part of that kingdom. And then all of a sudden the kingdom divided in 931 BC. It divided. Now you got the northern kingdom and you got your southern kingdom. We've said this many times in Sunday school. The northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. So the kingdom's divided. But see, they did not understand what that was going to do to the entire nation, to the 12 tribes. They didn't have a clue. So they started out their wicked ways. The northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And, and they was not pleasing God. So judgment's going to come. Judgment has to come. So, so the Hebrew people in those days were divided into two kingdoms. Israel, with its capital in Samaria, composed of 10 of the tribes. Judah owing the alliance of Jerusalem and the throne of David. So let me ask you this question right quick. What tribe was Jesus from? Was he from the northern tribes or was he from the southern tribe? Which the southern tribe was Judah. So where was he from? Judah. He was from that tribe. Yeah, I mean, because I just kind of give you a little clue there. Jerusalem and the throne of David. So all that is the genealogy of Jesus. Starting of that. Composed of the two tribes and the gathering remnants of the best of the other 10. Now, here's what we're saying there. God is always going to have a remnant for Israel. God is always going to have a remnant. If we go back and we think about it in our study, there was a remnant after Cyrus released the Jews to go back and rebuild the temple. How many went back? Now you've got to realize during these captivities, 70 years of captivity, you've got generations passing by. You've got people dying off. And you've got this generation. So as the new generation kept going and going, what were they falling into? Pagan worship. Pagan worship. Because that's what was today. I mean, you stop and think and look around, all around, there's a lot of churches today. It's kind of like, well, you throw a rock, you can hit a Baptist church about on any corner around here today. So, why so many churches? Why so many? That's a question I don't know if you can answer it. Why so many? Because you've got churches that split. Why do they split? Because somebody got mad at the color of the carpet? Or do they come up with all this stuff, well, I'm tired of listening to the way that he preaches? Or he's not preaching to things that I want to hear? I mean, I've heard that so many times. He's not preaching what I want to hear. Think about that for just a minute. It could be financial issues why the church split. It could be over finances. That's what happened. That's what happened if you go back and trace the history of why Israel split. Because of taxation. That's what it all boiled down to. You got one king that wanted to increase the taxes, and you had a group that just fell out. So you had 10 tribes in the north, you only had 2 in the south, so 2 in the southern. So anyway, the kings of Israel and Judah about this time. Now, during this particular time, what kings are we talking about? Well, we know it's Uzziah. We know it's Jotham. We know it's Hezekiah. All this we're in that particular time range right now, which plays a major role in what is going to occur. So, the king of Israel and Judah about this time had been strong, capable, and vigorous. But the time of Amos, a whole generation had grown up in an Israel that had never known defeat. The lesser kingdom, round about, especially Syria, Syria, been put in their place. Along the same length of years, Judah too had grown strong as Israel pushed north toward Damascus to Judah. So Judah had pushed south. All this meant such security across the borders as the twin kingdoms had not known since the golden age of David and Solomon, centuries before. So you've got God is going to the northern kingdoms and he's going to the southern kingdoms. Like the first prophet that we studied was Joel. And he was at Judah. You know, at this particular time, you got to split. So you got to understand what is actually going on. So, and Jonah went to Nineveh. Amos to Israel. So that's where we're at in the book of Amos. So, the purpose of Amos's prophecy is to awaken Israel and its surrounding nations to the fact that the nation is both responsible and accountable for its sins. And that's the problem. His theme then is national accountability for national sins. And we're living in a world today that there's not a whole lot of accountability. A whole lot. No one, you know, the responsibility and the accountability is not really there. So, so as we look at this book of Amos, you start in verse, we're up here at the first. Let's just go read verse 1. The words of Amos, who was among the herdsmen of Tekoa, which he saw concerning Israel in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah, and the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel, 2 years before the earthquake. Now this earthquake that they're talking about here, you really get in, if you go to the book of Zechariah, it really describes this earthquake and what has occurred. Again, there's going to be a further earthquake that's going to come along. There's earthquakes occurring here. And what was the earthquake for? Why did he have an earthquake? It's called a wake-up call. Sometimes, when you hear about these earthquakes that's occurring, I think, well, that's a wake-up call to what is going to occur. And because, we're in perilous times. We understand that. So anyway, and in verse 2, and he said, the Lord will roar from Zion. Now he's taken this same verse from the book of Joel. Book of Joel in chapter 3. And he said, the Lord will roar from Zion and utter his voice from Jerusalem, and the habitations of the shepherds shall mourn, and the top of Carmel shall wither. So that's a very short introduction to the book of Amos. But he's trying to get the people to understand. Then we start talking about nations. He's going to look at these nations. If you look at Damascus is the first judgment of Damascus. That's the nations. And this is where I think that Tack is really coming in at this point. He first of all is talking about these heathen nations. He's talking about these nations. But his real focus is on which one did we say? Israel. So he's kind of said, okay, God, I'm sure, let me make sure that you understand God's behind all this. But he's got him talking about these nations and what has occurred and what is going to happen. So then he will go into the judgment of Israel. So he's looking at these nations. And the first one is the judgment of Damascus. Then you look in verse 6 and it's talking about the judgment of Gaza. And there's a whole lot of stuff there that you can read and research yourself. I'm not going to stand up here and talk about those things. We just know that the nations punished for their sins, punished for the sins against nature, conscience, and natural feelings. That's what he's doing. Does that make sense? Because they're not living the life that God wanted them to live. He laid out the game plan. I mean, it was there. This is what you need to do. Now you got to split, and they're all doing their own thing. With the northern kingdom being worse than the southern kingdom. And so as we look at this, Judah and Israel sinned against revealed the will of God. Judah and Israel had sinned, just like we talked about. Now you can go to Romans 2, 12 and 14, also 12 through 15. You can look at that, and you get a better picture in the New Testament and how to connect that together. So you can look at that as well. All right. Gaza, then you look at verse 9. And this is also in Ezekiel 26:3 is a bit better picture of this than what Amos has pictured. But I don't think Amos is really picturing it. He's kind of informing them this is the judgment that's coming to these nations. He's trying to set the tone so when he starts talking about Israel, the judgment of Israel. So, thus saith the Lord, for 3 generations of Tyrus, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof. I'm in verse 9. Because they delivered up the whole captivity to Edom, and remembered not the brotherly covenant. Edom, Moab, Ammon, all these nations. Tyre remembered not the brotherly covenant, which their king Hiram had made with David and Solomon. Way back when we looked at that. This covenant had been long-standing. 2 Samuel 5:11, 1 Kings 5:2 through 6. All these things is a better picture. That he's just mentioning it. And why is he's just kind of introducing it, or whatever you want to say. He's just mentioning these things simply because he's going to set the tone for the judgment on Israel in chapter 2, verse 6. So, with all that said, we go into judgment on Israel, verse 6. Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Israel, and for 4. Wait a minute. We just read something about that. You see where I'm going with it? So he's setting this up to identify all the sins that Israel has committed and going against God. I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they sold the righteousness for silver, and the poor for a part of shoes. Now, you read that out. A couple of things in here I want to mention. The main thing that he's talking about, he's focusing on, is the pagan temples, the pagan worship. They're turned to worship, pagan religion. Those types of things. And because of Israel's flagrant violation of God's righteous law and the gracious provisions, inescapable judgment is going to occur. It's going to happen. Fall. Now, how's this going to happen? What is going to happen? How is God going to judge these people? Especially Israel. We call it, that we've been studying it over and over and over, the Assyrian captivity of 722. When he allows that nation to take over the northern kingdom, those 10 tribes are gone, and they're scattered abroad. They're scattered out. They refer to it a lot as the 10 lost tribes because they was never together. He scattered them out. That's the judgment they're talking about. Is there going to be judgment on Judah? Now, Amos doesn't really get into Judah, but there is going to be judgment on Judah. Now, you have a contemporary, a person along with Amos, with him a lot during this time, and his name be Hosea. Hosea also was preaching to the northern kingdom. So when we talk about, and the reason is because of the pagan temples that was established. Where were they established? In Samaria. Where is the ark? Where's the temple? Where's the ark located at this point in time? It's in the southern kingdom. It's in Jerusalem. Wherever the ark is, that's where God's at. So God was in the southern kingdom. This is coming from Amos. So you got this covenant, you got this ark right here. That's where the worship had to occur. Many people from the northern kingdom came down to give their sacrifices in the southern kingdom, because in Samaria was nothing but pagan worship. Do you get the picture? And that's what Amos is trying to point out a great deal here. In chapter 3, it says, it's kind of like the lion roars. So let me give you this right here. There's three sermons of Israel's sin. 3 sermons presented. And we start with those in chapter 3. The 3 sermons. So Amos 3, 1 through 15 is talking about the present sins. This is the sins. So you've got this occurring here. Now let me give you the reason why. And sin is the issue in the present sin. So, and one of the key verses, I like this verse here, and you've heard it repeated many, many times, is chapter 3, verse 3. Can 2 walk together except they be agreed? 2 legs are well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Can 2 walk together except they be agreed? Does anybody explain that to me? Brother Dustin did some time back. Does anybody have an idea? We're talking about sin, remember? Well, several different commentaries go in one direction and go in another direction. And I was hoping that we'd get a big discussion going on of this direction and that direction. But apparently we're not. But anyway, can 2 walk together except they be agreed? The way that I take this and what I've gathered from it is this right here. All right, let's just hit on one thing. Baptism. Baptism. Let's just talk about that for a minute. This is the way that I take this. Can 2 walk together? Can 2 walk together except they be agreed? You'd have that term baptism. There is denominations, churches that believe that a child needs to be baptized as soon as they're born. They need to be baptized. Do we believe that? Do you understand? Do you see where I'm going with this? To me, that's what's taking place here. We agree on some issues. We agree that there's only one God. And there's a lot of denominations that believe that there is one God. We believe in the triune, the Trinity. We believe that. There's a lot of denominations that believe that. Do we believe in the virgin birth? Yes. There's a lot of denominations that believe that. And there's some denominations that don't believe that. Do you see where I'm going? That's what this is talking about. That's the way that I take it. And I may be totally wrong. But that's okay. I've been wrong before. So anyway, then you get into verse 9, the present sins is what we're talking about. You get into verse 9 and you start there, and the rest of this is condemnation of Samaria because of all the pagan worship that's going on in that particular place. Then you start chapter 4. Chapter 4 is the second sermon, and it's talking about Israel's past. Israel's past. Now we're going into history. Israel's past. Now, well, let me just give it here. This here in Bashan is an indictment against the woman of Samaria. So you look at chapter 1 through 3, you're talking about the depravity of Israel. And then you look at verse 4, you're talking about God's punishment have not reformed Israel. The punishment that Israel has received. Now this is the past. We're talking about this has occurred the Assyrians coming in and taking over Israel. But did that solve all the problems with Israel at that time? Did they come out of that captivity? No. They got right in with the pagan worship. They stayed right with it. So in verse 8, 2 or 3 cities wandered unto one city to drink water, but they were not satisfied. Yet have ye not returned unto me, saith the Lord. Verse 9, I have smitten you with your blasting and mildew when your gardens and your vineyards and your fig trees and your olive trees increased. The palmer worm, we talked about the palmer worm. We talked about the destruction of all this. Devoured them, yet have ye not returned unto me, saith the Lord. Now, verse 9, what is he referring to? He's referring back to Joel. Back to Joel. You go and read the first chapter of Joel, the first few verses, and you're talking about the palmer worm, the cankerworm. You're talking about what? Locusts. The locusts. The plague of locusts. So he's talking about the past. Even though that judgment occurred, has it reformed Israel? The answer is no. No. So he's talking about that. All right? Then you get into chapters 5 and 6. And chapters 5 and 6 is the third sermon. And so in chapter 2, sermon 2, sermon 2, we talked about false worship. That's what that's talking about. The past. False worship. So sermon 3 is Israel's future. Israel's future. And in here, you can take a great deal out of this chapters 5 and 6, and you can go all the way across to the end of the book, end of the Bible, in that book of Revelation. And you're going to see a lot of comparison. You're going to look at that. It's going to talk about the Battle of Armageddon in there. It's going to talk about that. It's going to talk about those nations. And woe. And then chapter 6, the woe. There it is. The judgment on Israel. And it talks about different visions. Now there becomes 5 visions. Five visions. And that's Amos 7 through 9. 5 visions. Let me give you those visions. Now this is what Amos saw through God. That he saw. So anyway, the 5 visions. Okay, let's look at the first one in chapter 7. And it says here, I want to say this, and we just talked about the locusts, correct? We understand that. All right, thus hath the Lord God shown unto me, and behold, he formed what? What does it say there? In chapter 7, verse 1. Grasshoppers. Can anybody tell me the difference between a grasshopper and a locust?
A locust can fly and grasshopper can't.
That's the number one thing. So here, the locusts will come in and consume everything and fly away and move on. And you get into the different morphology of the development of the grasshopper and the morphology of the development of the locust. And when you get into that, what stage of development devour a great deal? And well, I'm not going to go down that road. Let's just move on. I don't want to go down that road. But anyway, I don't want to get into a biology lesson. So anyway, as you look at the grasshoppers and you talk about the locusts, and then referring to a lot of commentaries say that it's talking about the locust plague back in Joel. Well, it doesn't say locusts in the Bible. What does it say? It says grasshoppers. Grasshoppers can eat just as much. It's just the fact that the grasshoppers is not going to move on. The locust is going to eat there, and they're going to move on. They're going to destroy all vegetation. And that is, but the grasshoppers, and in here it does talk about its latter growth, and it talks about some of the other things. All right, in verse 4, moving on, you have your second vision, and it's the vision of fire. Vision of fire. I hope all this is making sense, or at least you go back and study, then you'll have a better understanding of it. But the fire is starting at verse 4. Thus hath the Lord God showeth unto me, and behold, the Lord God called to content by fire, and it devoured the great deep, and did eat up a part. So, the great deep means the vast reservoir of underground water, as well as the sea. Such a fire would be inextinguishable. I'll get that right in a minute. But you can't put it out. What else does it talk about that? You go in the book of Revelation. That's where that's what we're talking about. It's in the book of Revelation. That's going to occur. You take like when they came in, what did the Babylonians do? What did Nebuchadnezzar do when he took over Judah? He burnt. He burnt. He destroyed. One block unturned. So that's what we're looking at right here, the future that's going to occur. All right, then you go into the plumb line. You talk about the vision of the plumb line. And you're talking about chapter 7 and verses 7 and 9. 7 through 9. What are we talking about? The plumb line. What do we use a plumb line for? If you drop a plumb line, you make sure it's go ahead, brother. Brother Brendan. Everything's straight. What if it leans to the right? It's wrong. What if it leans to the left? It's wrong. So he's talking about the plumb line. So what has happened to Israel? It's swung too far to the right. It's out of line with God, is what it's referring to. So you go in there. And then you start in the vision of the summer fruit. And that's chapter 8. The vision of the summer fruit. But I want you to call your attention here on verse 10 and chapter 7. And it's the conflict of Amos and Amaziah, the tribe of Benjamin, the Amos and Amaziah. And you talk about Ephraim, and it says here that it came out of Bethel. All this is occurring. All this, his knowledge and everything is out of Bethel. Where is Bethel? What is Bethel? Does anybody know about Ephraim? Where's Ephraim? It's in Israel. It's down at the southern part of Israel. You got Ephraim. Now, it's really interesting, a good study, if you want to do a quick study. Look at the 12 tribes of Israel. Start out with the 12 tribes of Israel and Jacob giving out the land and the names who he gave it to. The Levites were left out. Why? Because they were priests, and there's going to be certain priests in each tribe. Okay? But when you get from there, then you got Jacob, and you go through that. There's 2 sons. Joseph is not mentioned. Joseph went back to Egypt, correct? So Jacob adopted the 2 grandsons, Ephraim and Manasseh. They were given tribes. They were given tribes at that time. Does that make sense? But when you get into the book of Revelation, and it talks about the 144, it changes again. Dan was not a tribe. Why? Because of pagan worship, idol worshiping. So he took Dan out of the picture. So, but when you when you get into this, Amos and Amaziah, the king, the priest, Amaziah the priest of Bethel, sent to Jeroboam, king of Israel, saying, Amos hath conspired against thee in the midst of the house of Israel. The land is not able to bear all his words. In other words, Amaziah did not want him to preach. Why? Because it was going against what Amaziah believed in. And this was in Bethel, the northern kingdom. just right below that little town, right below Ephraim, right on the border of Judah. So, with all that said, now, let's see, I'm looking for, I've got it in my book somewhere. Okay, so they go into so you have this first thing that's occurring, Amaziah talking, and then answered Amos in verse 14, said to Amaziah, I was no prophet. I've done read this to you once. Neither was I a prophet's son, but I was a herdsman and a gatherer of sycamore fruit. In other words, this is not me doing this. This is God. You're defying God. So, and then, like I said, the last vision, the basket of summer fruit. In other words, Amaziah said in the northern kingdom, don't prophesy to us. Go about your way. So in the closing of Amos, in chapter 9, in chapter 9, we've already seen 3 sermons. We've already seen five visions. 5 visions. And the last vision was the vision of a stricken doorpost. And now we're into the 5 promises. The last thing that I want to leave with you is the 5 promises. And like I said, I've tried to give you an outline on your own if you ever want to use this and study it. So you look at these things here. So the 5 promises in Amos is 9, 11 through 15. And this is actually the future restoration of Israel. The future restoration of Israel. So he's going to predict that someday, although they're scattered out, you've got them coming back. Just a picture of them, a remnant is coming back. But are they a nation at this time? When they come back, are they truly a nation? After Cyrus said you can go back and rebuild your temple, are they a nation recognized? Go like this. When did that happen? When did they become a nation? And that we're talking about here in 11 through 15 of chapter 9. 1948. That's when the only nation in biblical times that actually restored itself. U.S. was the first, yes. Mm-hmm. That's true. And U.S. was the first nation to help Israel and give them food and help them to restore the Gaza Strip. Have you ever heard of the Gaza Strip? When you talk about the Gaza Strip, and it's in here, just real quick, and it also talks in here just real quick, it talks about the heathen Gentiles in here, in this particular section. And you can go to the New Testament as well. It's found in verse 12, and so on and so on, of chapter 9. But I want to talk to you a little bit about the Gaza Strip. When they came back, the Gaza Strip, which was their agriculture place, and it was gone. It was desolate. The water was polluted and everything. Today, how many has ever heard of the term hydroponics? Do you know what hydroponics is? It's where they actually grow vegetables in a greenhouse, and they use the nutrients is coming through water, and it nourishes them. The biggest place and one of the best agriculture places you'll ever find today is in Israel, the Gaza Strip, because they're getting ready for the end. Because that particular nation and all that surrounds them is going to have nothing. No food, no water, nothing. It's going to be taken away. We talk about wormwood. The water's going to be polluted. The sea's going to be polluted. It's going to be full of blood. The smell is going to be awful. There sits Israel in that Gaza Strip, and they've got all that they need. So God's prepared them for it. So I get all that, and in the book of Amos, it's a great book to study. You'll go Amos, Joel, and Hosea. You'll get all 3 books. It's really neat. Is there any questions or any comments? I hope I've been a benefit to you. Maybe just introducing Amos to you, and encourage you to study the book of Amos. It's one of those writing prophets. You know, Elijah and Elisha, they were prophets, but they were not writing prophets. They were not writing prophets. So, with all that said, any questions or any comments? I know for a fact you have something on your mind. Well, that's great. You just keep it to yourself. See if I care. I try to learn. I want to learn. I stand up here and I want to learn this stuff, but I need help from you all to teach me. Because I know there's people out there sitting out there that know a whole lot more than I do about this. You know, I spent some time studying and trying to prepare for the lesson, and I hope it's been beneficial to you. But I mean, you start reading about these minor prophets, and it really it singles out. I know that Isaiah. We went through the book of Isaiah. A lot of information there, a lot of information, because it focuses on many things, many things. And you take like Joel, the book of Joel, two things it focused on: the day of the Lord and the locust plague. And you know, and you can see how you can fit that piece of the puzzle throughout the book of the Bible. And that's what I try to do. All right, I appreciate your attention.
She waited to this morning, and she always has a morning Decided to play in it. I was like, oh, I walked in and I was like, what's in your hands? And I looked in and I was like, oh no.
That's Caleb's fault.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that was Daddy's fault.
He put our clothes back on and then he fixed the bottle back. I was like, are you kidding me?
It's Daddy's fault.
Yeah, I'm gonna go show Angel and be like,
Yeah. Yeah, that's disgusting.
oh man, I got so.
Caleb had ripped her diaper last night, and whenever they got home, they didn't change it, so she used the bathroom, and it got everywhere.
Daddy's fault.
It's Daddy's fault.
Did you spend time with Brother Dalton last night?
Not really. She just kind of yelled at Brother Dalton, and she stayed calm and happy most of the time. I did get to feed her a little bit, though. The first child off the might be the last.
No, it ain't gonna be the last.
last.
Hopefully you guys will be having one pretty soon.
I don't know about it. We'll see.
Yes. Okay. Brenda Davis